This is the iPhone 16 Pro Max that I've been daily driving since launch. The honeymoon phase is over, and the hype train has long left the station. Now, it's time to answer the big question. Is it still worth it? So remember when phones were getting smaller? Yeah, Apple doesn't. This phone is massive. With this 6.9-inch screen size, we aren't far off from just sticking an iPad mini in our pockets and calling it a day. But that doesn't take away from this phone's beautiful design and rock-solid build. The titanium frame feels great and is actually surprisingly durable. I've been rocking no case for the majority of my time with it, and even dropped it on hard floor, but it still looks pristine. There's a very small dent where it hit the floor, but if I hadn't just pointed it out to you, I guarantee you wouldn't have noticed. Now that being said, I have been using a screen protector since day one. I'm not that brave. Now speaking of the screen, this gigantic 6.9-inch display is awesome. It's the same Super Retina XDR OLED we've had for the past couple years, which is Apple's fancy way of saying one of the best smartphone screens out there, but it is still the bee's knees. I mean, we're talking perfect blacks, great brightness, and colors that pop so much they pretty much high-five your eyeballs. Got HDR content? Handles it with ease. And of course, you can't forget about the 120 Hz ProMotion, which makes everything feel buttery smooth. Scrolling is smooth, animations are crisp, and gaming is pretty next level. Of course, on games that support 120 Hz. But once you use 120 Hz, going back to 60 Hz feels like watching a slideshow from 2005. That is unless you're a normal person though, because here's the thing. Most people I've asked can't even tell the difference between 120 Hz and 60 Hz. If you're one of those people, congratulations. Your brain just saved you from caring about something that most of us tech nerds obsess over. Me though? Yeah, I notice it. And that's why I hate using low power mode, because the moment it kicks in, it drops to 60 Hz and looks gross, to be honest with you. But you know what hasn't been gross? The battery. It's a Pro Max iPhone, so no surprises there. Now I do have my battery limited to 80% for longevity, but does that actually make a difference long term? Science says yes, and I'd rather not test that the hard way, so I'll just take their word for it. As for charging, my routine's pretty simple. In the car using wired CarPlay, and overnight using a MagSafe 3-in-1. That means my battery pretty much never drops below 50%, which is probably why I have zero battery anxiety. It's always just there, ready to go. So yeah, battery life is still rock solid. No complaints here. Now look, performance has literally never been an issue. It's an iPhone, you already know what to expect. But the A18 Pro, this thing's unreasonably powerful. Like Apple, who hurt you? We're talking M1 level performance. In case you didn't catch that, that's pretty much a desktop class chip in a phone. Just for fun, I ran Geekbench 6 on both this and an M1 iPad Pro, and the A18 Pro destroys the M1 in single core, and it's right on its heels in multi-core, which is bananas. The bottom line is, this phone is so powerful, we're basically at the point where Apple is running out of things to do with all this performance. Now, iOS 18 has been pretty solid, with some nice quality of life updates. First off, the Control Center redesign is actually pretty sweet. It's more customizable than ever, but also just customizable enough that you can turn it into an absolute abomination. Case in point, I have an entire page of 32 low power mode toggles because why not? Now the home screen updates are nice, but I am a creature of habit. My layout hasn't changed in years. If yours has, you have the patience that I do not. The Photos app also got a big redesign, and honestly, I kind of like it. But I totally get why some people don't. It's one of those things where Apple was kind of just like, trust me bro, you'll get used to it. And we all just kind of have to. And then there's Apple Intelligence, which is fine. I just don't really use it. It's one of those things where Apple was like, look at all this AI magic, and I'm over here still manually typing out text like it's 2010. Maybe one day it'll click, but for now, I mostly forget it exists. Now, as much as I love iOS, it's not perfect. I've had a couple of random freezes here and there while interacting with the media tile and Control Center, which isn't the end of the world, but it is still kind of annoying, but it fixes itself, so it's fine. But overall, iOS 18 is good, but it's still iOS, just a little fancier. Now, as expected, the camera looks fantastic. No surprises there. I've taken some great shots with it that you'll see here on screen now. Now, camera control, the big new thing for iPhone 16, yeah, it's pretty much useless for me. It's in an awkward place, so actually using it has been a bit of an inconvenience for me. Since you can already do everything it does on screen, I don't really find it that useful. Now, Apple did hype up visual intelligence, which can be launched by pressing and holding camera control, and sure, it can be useful here and there. It's basically Apple's take on Google's visual lookup, but I always forget it's there. That said, with iOS 18.3, it does finally do everything Apple originally promised, like recognizing animals and turning poster info into calendar events, which is cool in theory, but not exactly a daily necessity, if you ask me. But 4K 120 FPS video on a phone is just ridiculous, in the best way, of course. It's an incredible feature, but let's be real, 99% of people will never use it. If you're the kind of person who shoots high frame rate cinematic slow-mo, you probably already have a dedicated camera anyways. But still, having this feature on a phone is pretty crazy. And there's the audio mix feature, which honestly I'm convinced is pretty much magic. The ability to switch between standard, in-frame, studio, and cinematic audio modes is actually pretty impressive. Apple's processing does a pretty good job isolating voices, but I will say a dedicated mic is still going to sound better. Overall, the camera, come on, Apple still makes one of the best ones out there. It's not groundbreaking, but the little refinements we got this year, they're pretty nice. Now to the price. The iPhone 16 Pro Max starts at $1,200, which is just wild. But at least you get 256 gigs of storage now instead of 128. Small wins, I guess. But if you want to go all out, you can spec it up to 1 terabyte for $1,600, which is base model MacBook Pro money. Imagine walking into an Apple store and debating, do I want a maxed out iPhone or an actual laptop? Now at this point, Apple isn't even pretending that this is just a phone anymore. It's a Pro device with a Pro price tag, whatever that means these days. But they do know people will still buy it regardless. I mean, a CIRP report did show the 16 Pro Max is still the best-selling model in the 16 lineup. So whatever they're doing, it's clearly working. So after 4 months with the iPhone 16 Pro Max, do I still love it? Absolutely. It's been a fantastic phone. Great battery life, insane display, and enough power to comfortably run macOS if Apple really wanted it to. But should you upgrade? Well, if you have a 13 Pro Max or newer, it's probably not worth it, unless you get a killer trade-in deal, because Apple's upgrades have really been incremental. And while this phone is great, it's not that different from the past couple of years. For me though, upgrading from a 14 Pro, the biggest difference wasn't even 14 to 16. It was more Pro to Pro Max. The bigger screen and the better battery made the biggest impact, not really the raw generational jump. But if you're coming from a base model iPhone or even an older Pro model, this could be a great upgrade. You'd be getting better battery life, a bigger, more immersive screen, and of course, an improved camera system. But at the end of the day, the iPhone 16 Pro Max is a beast, but whether it's worth upgrading depends on where you're coming from. If you're on the fence, maybe just wait for the iPhone 17. Hope you found this review helpful. This has been Emmanuel. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.